Welcome to Grow Fast, Grow Smart, the PI Playbook by Accelerator, the podcast exclusively designed to help personal injury law firms reach their full potential and serve their clients better. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the PI Playbook, where we focus on top marketing and operations strategies for personal injury law firms. Brought to you by CJ Advertising and Accelerator Law Firm Consultants. This podcast is designed to help PI law firms grow fast and grow smart in all areas of their practice. I'm your host, Stephanie Koehler, and today we're talking about AI, Google, and the future of search with my guest, CJ Advertising's senior digital content writer, Seth Sparks. Welcome back, Seth.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm really excited for today's topic.
I am too. This is all about search experiences and how law firms can better understand and participate in the future of AI search. All right, well, we'll start with the basics. How is AI reshaping the search landscape, and what does that mean for law firms?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when you kind of consider all of these things in aggregate, AI, large language models, and large language models are really these tools, ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, even Google's Gemini. These things are often referred to as AI. So we'll just use those terms interchangeably. But it's beginning to transform search in ways that I think we'll be unpacking for months and years to come. Because these tools provide conversational answers to questions that people ask. They really change the way that people browse the web, the way that they use search engines. And there was one prediction by a tech firm Gartner that found that they suggested and predicted by 2028, as much as 50% of brands' organic search traffic will be affected, will be essentially lost as consumers embrace these technologies. And for law firms, this change will have an impact. Traditional SEO, especially for local businesses like law firms, is still incredibly important. But we do have to shift how we think about optimizing for the web. And in many ways, that means really reconnecting with some of the time-tested principles of how to grow a business.
All right. I can't wait to hear a lot more about all those things. So that was an exciting stat about what's in the future for search. But is there any information about how people currently use platforms like ChatGPT?
Yeah, absolutely. And boy, I could go deep into the stats, but I'll try to keep it high level here, which is as of December 2024, Sam Altman, who is the one of the founders of OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, spoke to the New York Times, and he mentioned that there are 300 million weekly active users of ChatGPT and 1 billion user messages on ChatGPT every single day. So for a frame of reference, that was at 200 million in August, just 4 months before he announced that in December, and their user base doubled in less than a year. A tool like Claude they announced a 16% quarterly user growth. So that's a big jump. But if you were to just look at like ChatGPT alone, and you were to assume that every time that a user entered a message into ChatGPT, if that is the equivalent of a search in a Google or a Bing, then it would already have eclipsed Bing as a way that people get their information. Now, that information comes from Rand Fishkin. He's a real thought leader in the digital marketing space and founder of SparkToro. He really provides the caveat that that's not a fair comparison. That's not an apples to apples. If you've ever interacted with one of these tools, it's not like every time you engage with it, that's the same as going and searching on search engines. But I do think it highlights the emergence of these tools, of these AIs or large language models as players on the digital search landscape. And then, of course, you have Google's own live iteration of this powered by Gemini, their AI, and it's called AI Overviews. And there's a whole other component to that.
Yeah. I know we're going to talk a little bit about Google AI Overviews later. So can you give us like a high level kind of what is it? When would a user encounter a Google AI Overview?
Most likely anyone listening to or watching this has seen these, whether they realize it or not. And I've kind of come to realize that because we're so geeky and in the industry, we're very aware when we see, I just saw an AI overview on Google. But I find that, I see folks, and like my mother-in-law sent a message to my wife the other day where they had a question they were talking about. She was like, "Oh, I found the answer." Sent a screenshot of where she found the answer, and it was an AI overview. Just a casual user, not aware of those types of things. But my wife, who's probably sick of hearing me talk about these things all the time, was like, here's an AI overview, and somebody using it out in the wild. But when it comes to these things, a recent study found that they're now basically in half. It was like 47% of Google searches trigger these AI overviews. And that's, you enter in a question or something into Google, and before you see any listings, before you see any advertisements or maps or whatever, there's this sort of chunk of text that just provides an answer to your question. And there are usually links to the sites, the websites, or the sources of information where they got that from. And that's a significant thing. Not only does that provide information, it takes up nearly half the screen space on both desktop and on mobile. And then even before these things got to that level, even before half of searches trigger an AI overview, we know that around 60% of searches that someone enters into Google end without a click. Those are called zero-click searches. So somebody types in something they're looking for. Maybe they found the answer they wanted. Maybe they decided to rephrase what they were searching, but it yielded no further clicks. So it really has a potential to be significant. It'll be very interesting to learn what impact these AI overviews have on traditional searches and that zero-click rate, but it's likely to be significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Zero click is something that we at CJ have been talking about for a while. And I want to connect that back to personal injury firms. So when someone asks a question and doesn't end up translating to like a click to a website, like what's happening for the user in that scenario? What information are they getting? What actions might they be taking?
It's interesting. So there's a breakdown of this. Again, some of the information that Rand Fishkin has been providing as of late. He's been really on top of this, and the data suggests that still, of the zero-click searches, a significant portion of those still go to websites, and we see that in our data, right? Like even when our clients pop up in these AI overviews as sources, people are still visiting websites, but a ratio of about half that is staying on Google. They find what they need on Google. They can find information about a specific law firm, or if they're not looking for a specific brand, they could also just be looking for general inquiries about law firms in their community or potential information about a legal issue that they're having. And they might encounter information on Google itself that doesn't necessitate like further diving into the traditional search engine organic listings. Again, we see some reflection of that in the data. We can tell that users are clearly still clicking through the website. So, the game hasn't completely changed overnight, but watching these trends, it's interesting to see this sort of increased adoption of these things. And of course, Google loves to keep folks on Google. It's a huge priority for them too. So great news for Google to see those zero clicks that don't take anyone off of Google.
I know we're going to get more into kind of the Google ecosystem in a bit, but you've mentioned a lot of things about how people interact with these types of AI tools and with Google AI overviews. But how are these AI tools actually changing like user expectations and behaviors when they're searching? Like, are people changing with these tools? Are the tools changing people? Chickens, eggs?
I think this to me is like the most fascinating part of the whole thing. Like this is the question, the most important question of where we're at in the search world. And there's some research that already suggests that the search term length, so when someone goes onto Google and they type in shoes near me or, best sushi in Los Angeles or whatever, that those search terms, that the things that they're typing have increased in length since the release of large language models. But to go even deeper than that is like, does the mere existence of these tools raise the bar of what users expect to get out of current technologies like Google or any other search engine? And I know you're a fellow power user of these tools. And once you get used to the experience of having an informational conversation with an AI tool and you go back to a search engine, it's almost like going from high-speed internet to like a 90s dial-up modem. It's somewhat jarring. And when you talk to power users. You often hear the word antiquated. I think that that's true. The thing that always strikes me is when you use these large language models, when you use ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude, and you return to that Google search bar, you're suddenly sort of aware of these limitations that you've never noticed. For example, to type in a search term, you have to sort of think about the best and most concise way to phrase your search to get the result that you wanted. And 20 years of Googling, I think, has made us all kind of forget that that's what we're doing. But when you engage long enough with one of these AI tools and you go back, the cognitive demands of that very simple act, it starts to feel like a little like a nuisance. So it's simply like less convenient. And I do think that Google's AI overviews that we've talked about, and we could talk more about it, I feel like they feel like a response to that and a way to sort of counter that ease of use. Maybe Google will also continue to make other changes to sort of address that even further. And I think if they don't, they do run the risk of losing business to these emerging technologies.
Absolutely. So yes, I am definitely a big user of all the AI tools. I like to switch between them. We're going to hopefully chat about that later. And what I've noticed about my own searching is that something preposterous has happened, which is that when I search for something online, I expect to find a useful answer. So whether if it's what other movie was the actor that I see on my screen right now in, or I'm planning a vacation right now. So I'm like, help me have, here are my dreams and longings, what kind of vacation I should go to. So I'm able to ask AI language models a lot more abstract questions and then still get kind of a conversation going that gives me the information that I need. So it kind of helps me figure out what question I'm asking, which is very different than I love your example of how we're trained to use search engines, because the idea of best sushi is is a keyword that I know and love because I'm always looking for best sushi. And what I'm looking for, right? I know what I'm getting when I write best sushi into Google. I'm getting a Yelp review. I'm getting a blog. Maybe there's a local paper who has something like Eater that has gotten a list of sushi reviews. So I know that that's what I'm going to get. And the difference to me with AI is that I will ask it a subjective question like that, and it will help me understand what it is I want from my sushi, right? It will help me understand the longing for sushi that I have. And then I can go back into Google and be like, okay, actually what I wanted was this thing. And then find that on a local level. So yeah, I see that the search terms are much longer and it's just less work. And I totally agree with when you go from one AI conversation when you're searching for information, and then you go back to Google, and it's you have to remember that it's keywords. So it's a lot of changes in the way people use, at least I use search. But I want to ask you, we're talking about zero click and AI overviews and ChatGPT. Are we seeing a fundamental shift in how people expect to find information online? Is there no going back now? What is Google? Do we stop using the word Google as a verb? What's happening, Seth? Tell me.
So it is an interesting, fascinating time. And it's really captured everyone's imagination. And I think that you can listen to the two voices I wouldn't listen to are the ones on the extreme side, the ones that say none of this matters, and the ones that saying everything is now, we're in a completely different world where none of the same rules apply. I think it's an important data point to remember is that today, 99% of AI users still use traditional search engines. And we might see a big impact on Google's market share, especially around the things you're talking about, like the informational searches, right? Where you're looking for the answer to a question that you have, or you're looking for an actor in a movie or whatever, right? But adoption of these tools won't be overnight. You can even imagine that in 10 to 20 years, certain demographics will just always use Google the way that they've learned to use it over the last 20 years. That's a long time to become familiar with a way to do a thing and then to ask someone to do it differently. But on the informational side of things, currently a little over half of Google searches are those informational searches. And I could definitely see that changing with the rise of these AI tools. And the most likely implication of all this, I think, is, especially in the near term, is that people still use Google to search for something that they're already aware of. For example, local businesses or known brands or websites like we just discussed. So who knows what these large languages will look like in the years to come. But I think people are familiar with Google. I think they'll continue to use it in a pretty large capacity in many years. And so I think it's safe to say that the Google genie isn't going back in the bottle anytime soon.
Absolutely. Okay, so from a like I'm thinking this myself, like would you say if you were using ChatGPT to answer a question, would you call it Googling? Or would you call it something else?
I know, right? There's like a paradigm shift that's going on. It's like, what do you even call it when you're like, because right now we're just like, I was talking to my tool. And that's the thing, like you can literally talk to these tools. You can have a voice activated search and essentially have a conversation. And it's a sort of a profound switch from this whole like, okay, how do I phrase this in the way that I'm going to get these results that I want back? And maybe I'll go on a Reddit forum or something like that. And that's Googling, and what you call this and what this experience is. It's very different. And it's very interesting way to think about the future of these things. We use them. We love them. And clearly like their user base is increasing and going up. But ultimately, like how quickly will this adoption happen? What percentage of folks will adopt it? And then even I'm sure you still use Google too. I still use Google as well. So like, what are we going to use it for? Even the people who are talking to ChatGPT and talking to Claude or Perplexity, what are they going to use traditional search engines for? I think is a big question. I mean, we have a pretty good idea, of what they're doing now, and how will that change in the years to come?
Absolutely. Oh, it's so fascinating. I'm thinking of it like when you Google something, it's kind of like mining the internet for information. And sometimes you need to do that. Like sometimes I want to see what online thinks about that. So I do find myself interacting quite a bit with the Reddit results from Google searches, even though I myself am not a Reddit user. And then with AI, it's like no friction, just the answer. And that's a different experience.
It's very different experience. And Reddit has obviously, forums like that have obviously increased a lot on search engines. You probably see more of them than you used to. And I think it's because people do like to see discussions about things. There's some theories out there about Google's relationship with Reddit and the fact that we're seeing more of them. So that's a whole other discussion. But I think it is really interesting to consider the ways that we are using it and the ways that it's like, you use the AI tool maybe to increase your awareness of something, to learn more about a situation. And then once you kind of know what you want to Google, you go into the yellow pages. It's like that difference of like you had the yellow pages and they were huge, and everybody in marketing who was in marketing and advertising back in the day, sort of in the pre-Google era, or even in the early days of Google, that was our reference point. You would pick up a phone book, which sounds so antiquated today.
Let's return to Google AI overviews. How are they changing the way people interact with Google results and the search engine results page?
Yeah, I think that there is a real sense of like, all the things that we're talking about with large language models, that's what Google wants to offer within search itself. So I think that they were really at the forefront of this technology. I think that they were really the ones who were investigating artificial intelligence and large language models more specifically. How do we use those things? And then they kind of got caught on their heels by the ChatGPTs of the world. And once those things started to become public, it was like, again, the genie doesn't go back in the bottle. And so Google is sort of like, well, okay, we can't be caught flat-footed of this. And they're probably aware of all the experiences we're talking about, right? We don't want to be dinosaurs in this age of people having conversational information, conversational like queries with AI models. So what they did is they released these AI overviews. It was very dicey at first. There were all sorts of news reports about AI overviews suggesting people eat rocks for the health benefits of, they contain a lot of minerals. And there are all sorts of examples of this in the beginning. And those AI overviews really scaled back. Now, over time, what we're seeing is a big difference in the sources of information that they're pulling from. It used to be the case that if you asked, how do I find a good personal injury lawyer near me? A site that was on like page 5 or 6 might have popped up in the AI overviews. Now we're seeing a much closer alignment to what's listed in the organic listings. So the AI overview has become much more sophisticated. It's providing much more helpful information to a certain extent. And if you use them enough and you're paying attention to what you're looking at on the search engine results pages, they're not always perfect and they're not always spot on to what you're looking for, but they do lend themselves to saying, okay, we have the information right here. Now, what they've added since they rolled this out are these little links and these little sources, like here are the sources that we pulled from. When you're seeing those links up there, and a lot of our clients appear for those, we see them all the time. What we don't yet know are the click-through rates of those. So if someone asks a question and Google says, yes, here's the answer to your question, and they list a lot of bullet points, and each of those bullet points has a link to it, are people clicking those links? Are they entering through it? And that's something that Google will need to provide us, and they have yet to do that. So we don't quite know what the click-through rate of that is. Again, 0-click searches, what percentage increase are we seeing as these things become more common? And then, it's just yet another opportunity for Google, again, to keep folks on Google. And even if you scroll beyond these AI overviews, which if you expand them, they can take up like the entire page, right? Or at least half of a page to begin with, whether you're on a mobile device or a desktop. So there's this keeping people on Google, right? It's like, I think that's the ultimate goal.
Absolutely. So before we move on to keeping people on Google, do we know how or why one answer to a question appears in the AI overview versus another? And here I'm thinking of the kind of content that personal injury law firms will share. So it's what to do after an accident, or here's 5 things to say, to ask questions to ask your attorney before signing up. So these kind of questions that are important to people in the process of choosing a PI firm, but there are lots of different and often very similar answers to them. So what do you know what the differentiator is in terms of what Google picks up?
There are a lot of theories on it. There's a lot of research done. Google is not necessarily this is just how Google kind of operates. And it's understandable that they're sort of transparent with their algorithms and how they choose what's going to appear where, and how Gemini leverages this information and chooses what to feature in those AI overviews. So it's really more about research and theory at this point. But one of the things that we are noticing is like a semantic match. So whatever question you're asking, or whatever question out there most closely resembles that query that a user, that search term that they've entered in a search engine, is going to stand a better chance of appearing in AI reviews. There's some research that suggests that certain back-end structured data, like schema markup, and that's just nerdy talk for a bunch of code you put on a site that tells Google what the page is about, that could actually have an impact. But I think one of the more interesting ththings about this for me is, just as someone who is watching this roll out and kind of following the data closely and looking at the tools that we use, like Bright Edge, which is kind of a leading voice in this community, and we talk to them and work with them a lot. One of the things that really stood out to me was that before you even could have a theory of how to optimize for these things, and they were just starting to appear out in the wild, is how many of our clients started to appear for AI overviews. It didn't require any extra touch from us. We didn't have to go in and say, what are we going to do to make this appear? They just started appearing. And I really genuinely believe that these AI overviews are getting better at identifying the quality content out there. Is this content really covering a topic from a lot of different angles? So is it thorough? Is it useful for readers? Is it useful for users? And so I think that I do think that these tools have gotten more sophisticated in being able to identify a good match for that. I think that this will be an ongoing game of watching trends and identifying what we need to do to make sure that we are competitive for those things. But it's interesting that I think that if you are doing solid content, you're probably noticing that you're already appearing in some of those AI overviews already.
Absolutely. That goes back to the Google Helpful Content Update that, from a few years ago, that we really where we felt, I don't know, us as a content writers at CJ felt really justified. We were like, we've been writing quality, helpful content this whole time. And it was really nice to see Google really come out and say, yes, that's what we want is we want these blog posts or practice area pages to offer like actionable and helpful information that really answers people's questions that they have. And that totally ties back to what we were talking about earlier is that new expectation with search to say, I have a question. I am looking for an actual answer. I am not looking for a keyword string. I'm not looking for something that is adjacent to my answer, but doesn't directly address it. And so that those practices are, were important then and still are today. All right, let's get into the kind of Google zero-click environment. I'm so fascinated by how Google has evolved to become a destination itself. I've always thought of it as like a link to other things, right? You Google things, then you go away from Google. And over the last few years, that's really been changing. Can you help our listeners really understand how it's changed and really what are users experiencing on Google now?
So if you are looking for something, if you are looking for a local product or a local service, you can do so much investigation and searching and kind of raising your awareness. So much of that like buyer's journey that you hear about in marketing, where someone goes from awareness that they even have a problem all the way to finding the specific solution that they want to their problem. So much of that can be done on Google itself without even going into a website. Now, we know that people are still going to websites. We still see that reflected in the data. But the thing that's important is that you also have an opportunity as a law firm to be very findable and very, educational about what you do. And essentially, there's this whole ecosystem that you can just stay on Google. We've talked about AI reviews quite a bit, but even if you go beyond that, everyone, I think at this point, if you've been searching, you see the local map packs, the list of businesses that fit the criteria of the search that you just entered. And in those, you see the number of reviews. So you get an idea of their reputation. And there's sort of like how many people have used this product or service locally. And for law firms, reviews are a critical portion of this, but it's not just that. You can see their phone number. You can make a phone call directly from Google. You can learn information about the firm itself. You can see their practice areas. You can see pictures of them. You can see where they're located, and you can get a real sense of how they're perceived in the community and all of the things that you would need to know. Of course, there's this little button in the corner of these listings where it's like website, and clearly people click on those, and we track that. But yeah, I mean, it's really important for law firms to be very aware of that and to optimize accordingly. And so really knowing the rules of the game when it comes to Google business profile optimization, making sure that you're doing everything you can to make that listing, that your business is listing in that local area, as helpful as possible, as useful and as informative as it can be, and really encouraging folks. I mean, the review aspect of this can't be overstated. You really have to encourage those reviews. There are services that you can use to also help you engage users and to help clean up bad reviews that may not actually be accurate. That might be, whether it's some form of spam or it's just something that wasn't somebody that wasn't actually a client or whatever. There are ways to look at that, but more importantly is just like encouraging folks to leave reviews, being mindful of how you're perceived online, because your potential clients are going to be looking at that information, and it's really important to make sure that it's buttoned up as best as possible.
Absolutely. It's like how the AI overview helps answer a question. So, who was that guy in that movie? The map pack and Google Business Profile really also answer a question, right? Is this a business that I want to interact with? And so when you go to click through and you see that GBP, you're seeing really everything that's needed, right? If they can go to the website if they want more information, but they're seeing the review, they're seeing the phone number, the location. And these are things that, when you're ready to take an action, that's immediately available to you. So it's really Google allowing people to have access to the information they need to make a decision. And then, having that website. So it's not just like optimizing your website for conversions. That particular piece of Google is so important. I know that's what you're saying, but that was like I don't know, that blew my mind. I was like, whoa, that's so true. Because I interact with GVPs all the time, for all the sushi I'm always going out and getting. But like, I never think about how businesses really need to optimize for it. And I know that quite a few aren't, right? So one of the most common cases for I would click on that tiny website button is because your menu isn't in there.
Exactly.
because it's a restaurant. And so, yeah, so if firms really invest in that sort of piece of Google real estate, it really helps them stand out from their competitors. It's super, super cool. Let's talk a little bit about content creation here. So we've sort of touched on how helpful content or quality content is a big piece of that. But like, what does that mean for personal injury law firms? Like, what are they actually trying to do on their websites, and how that connects back to GBP?
Absolutely. So I think that it all does, this all connects together, and content, I think, is really always going to be a very critical part of any serious like web presence optimization, right? Website optimization, web presence optimization, however you would like to think of it. But, and essentially when we're talking about content in this context, obviously content is a big word that can include any type of information that you're putting out there into the world. But for purposes of our discussion, especially when we're talking about things that AI overviews are pulling from, or what the algorithms on Google are looking at and assessing, they're really talking about like the words that you have on your website. Again, that's sort of a summation of what we're looking at. But what you have to think of is quality, and quality means, was this just churned out without any real regard to like, is there consistency within the content? Is it thorough? Is it answering the question thoroughly and maybe anticipating some follow-up questions that somebody would have? If you have a blog post about a question, are you kind of thinking about that from a lot of different angles and covering things? And that's important for a couple different reasons. First of all, you have a real opportunity to be the entity that answers a question that somebody has, and that's a powerful thing to build trust. And then there's another opportunity as far as just showcasing to the Google bot that comes and looks at your website. And that's actually what it's called. If anyone thinks I'm just being silly, the Google bot comes and look at your site and it assesses everything, right? It's going to look at the whole of your content and to determine, okay, is this a recipe site that has a one post about being injured in a car accident? Well, then that car accident entry is probably not going to perform all that well. But if this website has a whole sort of infrastructure of content about personal injuries or car accidents or how to deal with insurance adjusters, all of this, that's called topical authority. And it's a really important thing to be able to be visible on search engines, to be sort of, for lack of a better term, like taken seriously by Google as it crawls and indexes your site and decides what to rank. So there are a few different reasons why it's really important to create that helpful content. I think the first thing that you should always consider is users, right? You have an opportunity to be helpful to someone who needs an answer to a question. And that's really powerful thing that you can do through content marketing. And then the second part of this is really sort of establishing yourself as an authority in the eyes of not just users, but also search engines for the topics that you're talking about. So content is the most effective way to do that. And it's really sort of a non-negotiable way to build up that authority and to build that trust with both users and the robots.
Oh, Googlebot sounds so cute. I wonder if he'll be my friend.
He's a monster.
All the best monsters are very cute. Okay. The next piece is like traditional marketing, brand building. Like how do the things that personal injury law firms are already doing interact with this age of AI?
So around 44% of searches on Google are for branded terms. That's more information from Rand Fishkin and the studies that he's conducted. And I think that that's such a sobering statistic. So really, when you're thinking about how people use the web, and this is probably only going to continue to increase as people are having those more conversational, informational based conversations with AIs, that ratio is probably going to increase. branded terms, searching for brands is just a cornerstone of Google that I don't see going away anytime soon. It will always be a valuable way to think about it. If you're looking for a specific website or a specific business, you often go to Google and you Google that business. And so building brand awareness is sort of as old as marketing and advertising itself, building awareness and trust.
As the yellow pages?
Yes, exactly. Even predating, like back before there were phones, it was so important to build awareness of what you do and the fact that you're available and that you're offering a helpful product, right? And so I think that we're returning to a time where that's like front and center. And not that ever really went anywhere, but I think there was this period between 2000 and 2018, or pick your 2-decade window thereabouts, where new and small businesses really did have a more level playing field because of Google. And over the past few years, I think that door is closing. We're seeing that brand is such a significant factor in how you're going to appear on search engines and what kind of visibility you'll have online. So I think that we're back to the point where brand is absolutely the most important thing for any business looking to grow. So I think that's non-negotiable. You have to be involved with your audience and your community. You have to meet them where they're at with this quality content that we're talking about, whether they're on social platforms, whether they're on Google and they're Googling for things, or if they're on AI and they're Googling. You have to be able to meet them where they're at, and you have to be quality. You have to provide quality content that we just talked about. You have to make sure that they have a great experience with you. This goes beyond just websites. We're really leaning into the user experience aspect of optimizing for website. When someone comes to your website, do they have a good experience? That is such an important part after you've invested all of this time and energy and money into driving traffic to your website. Are you closing the deal on your website? Are you creating a frictionless experience for users? Of course, I mean, it goes beyond websites. Are they having a great experience at your office? Are they having a great experience with the folks that they deal with? These things are crucial. User experience, creating that quality content, and really building brands. So build your brand, make sure that you're really putting an emphasis on being helpful with the content that you offer, and make sure that people who interact with you have a great experience.
Absolutely. So, do quality work, reach out to your communities, and kind of as we have an understanding that things in terms of AI search, they're really changing, they're really developing. I think it's so interesting you mentioned that there weren't like click-through statistics on the AI overviews. I feel like that's hopefully coming. It seems so. It's just it really shows that such an evolving situation and something where people's behaviors are really starting to change. We're recording this in December of 2024, so I have to ask, what's coming up next year that you think is going to affect search for law firms?
Yeah, this is, I think, the thing that it's just such a fascinating time. Like if you've been in this world, in the SEO world or in digital marketing world, content, anything, it's just one of the most fascinating times. And the thing that you really learn is like, don't get too attached to anything, right? Don't get too attached to a certain strategy or campaign that you feel is like, you're going to live or die by this. Try to keep an open mind about things. That's the mentality that I have going into 2025, is keeping an open mind, while also there's this temptation to just get distracted by the next headline that you read. When we know that these things work, right? When you know that branding works, when you know that quality content works, when focusing on the experience of people who interact with you either in person or online, those things are fundamental, and they should always be. That's like the bread and butter, and that should always be front and center in your strategy. But looking forward, it's like, what does the future hold? I never would have anticipated all the things that happened in 2024, whether it was just an insane amount of pretty substantial Google core updates, the updates that Google makes to its algorithms, a DOJ lawsuit against Google, this antitrust thing that's going on with them, the rise of AI models. Like, there's no way that anyone would have predicted that all of this was going to happen. And so I think that, like, if you embrace that growth mindset, right? If you embrace this thing where it's like, hey, we know what works, but we're also going to be open to pivoting and being flexible in what we do in our approach to all of this stuff. If you kind of have that mentality, you can kind of have a good time with this, right? And it's a fascinating time, whether you're a user of these technologies or whether you're looking at them for business growth purposes. It's like, a lot of questions that we asked here today. Do we learn more about click-through rates on these AI overviews? What are the adoption rates of the AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity? Do people continue to flock? Do they continue to see this growth? Do these tools spread, as people kind of see someone else using it? Do they start to adopt it too? And does the existence of these things, again, to go back to something that we talked about earlier, does it force Google's hand to sort of take a look at their own experience? Are they going to look at their own results pages and say, wow, this doesn't look like ChatGPT's search functionality? And people seem to like that. Just out of fear of losing market share, do they adapt and make changes? And then, what comes out of the legal situation in Google? There's so many questions that I can't wait to find out the answer to. And I think that that's what 2025 is going to be about. It's like, do the things work, and then hurry up and wait on the new development in in this crazy world, because it's a fascinating time to be involved with it. And I'm glad that people are paying attention.
Absolutely. Well, expect the unexpected. I'm so grateful for you, Seth, for being here and for staying on top of all of this information. I know that Google Core updates shake our SEO team's world several times this year, and I'm so grateful that you take the time to really understand and translate that for our clients, and mostly so that I can just continue to sit obliviously, looking up sushi restaurants and dreaming about a trip to Japan with no real sense of what's happening behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you, and thanks for joining us today, and have a great year for AI ahead of us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been a blast.
That's all for today's episode of Grow Fast, Grow Smart, the PI Playbook by Accelerator. Be sure to subscribe for more tips and tricks on growing your law firm the smart way.